podcast. My name is Andy, and the footy season is almost upon us. It's so close you can smell the deep heat and taste the meat pies. I can't wait to board the train, get off at Richmond Station and make the trek up to the ground and bask in the glow of those red and blue LEDs that light up the G. I'm bloody fired up. This is the greatest time of the year when we're all full of hope that this is just the first step on the long road to redemption for the Demons. A road that hopefully ends in glory on that one day in September when the majority of Demon fans will finally, in person, get to see Goody and Max lift the Premiership Cup in triumph. Oh, what dreams may come. Joining me tonight to preview the 2023 season is my co-host Binman. Binman, are you as fired up as I am for the 2023 season?
I thought so, but maybe not after that. I'm pretty fired up. I have to say I cannot wait for this season. I'm more excited this season than I can recall for a long time. I think feels like a long break. And I said last week, the whole palaver with the grand final going into December and all of that felt like that was a compressed preseason. This feels the opposite. It feels like I just can't wait for it to get going. And it's terrific that it's starting a week earlier than it has done in other years because of the gather round. And so I am super pumped. Perhaps not as pumped as that, but just a long road to redemption. I mean, 57 years is a long road to redemption. 2 years is a short walk in the park for redemption.
But now that we've had that taste of glory and, we weren't physically there, it just feels like last year was a bit of a letdown, particularly after the start to the season, 10 in a row, which was 17 in a row. Everyone, my biggest worry was that we'd go through the season undefeated and possibly lose a grand final. That was my worry. That was keeping me up at night. And then to go the season to fizzle out the way it did. And then, there's all these question marks on whether we were playing injured or we ran out of steam. And it was just all a bit let down, like a balloon being let down. So now I'm fired up.
Just on that, I think it's actually a good point because I in terms of that letdown, because I hadn't really thought about it heaps, but it took me ages to process going out the finals in two. I was so gutted in that Brisbane game. I had to go sit by myself. I told you in the top of the Ponsford, and it was just because in that second half it was clear that we weren't going to win to me, and it's. In a way, once we lost that game in my brain, I just went, I'm not interested in football. and only in the last few weeks have come out of my football hibernation. I could care less about the games that happened after we lost the grand final, apart from the fact I had a punt on it and won. That was about the only joy I got out of the rest of that footy season. So, yes, I'm super pumped. And, it's exciting, isn't it? The big talk this season doesn't always flow this way, but, about all teams playing more direct footy, all teams moving the ball more quickly, so hopefully that means that there's lots of exciting footy and hopefully we roll into it because, of course, who doesn't want to go to the game of the footy and watch your team score high and be aggressive and take risks and do all of those things. So maybe they're on the redemption. Maybe it's 57 years or now it's 59 years since we've won a grand final at the MCG. Maybe that's the redemption story. In front of the fans at our home ground, Collingwood, not anyone else's home ground, our home ground at the MCG, a flag.
You're not going to get any arguments from me. Unfortunately, George was unable once again to join us tonight, but don't fret. He's provided us with some notes about some of the topics that we're going to be talking about tonight, as well as some of his predictions and observations about the team that he has formed, that he has from what he's seen in the preseason. So I'll present them on his behalf throughout the show. In addition, many listeners have provided their own questions, comments and predictions, and we'll read them out and answer them throughout the program as well. So tonight, each of us, including George, has taken one of the lines, the defence, the mids and the forwards, and we'll give our 2 cents worth about them. Binman will take our miserly defence. I'll discuss our Rolls Royce of an engine room, and George has sent in his appraisal of the forward line. And we'll also present our predictions about which of our opposition teams will rise and which ones will fall. If you're listening live tonight and would like to join the conversation with your own questions, comments, predictions or observations about the upcoming season, please give us a call on 039016 3666. That's 039016 3666. You can also join us in our chat room. You can post questions, comments, and then we'll try to monitor it and answer if we can. It's a bit harder when there's just the two of us here to be able to keep up with what's going on in the chat room. But still leave your comments there and we might get to it. So without further ado, Big Man, would you like to see if you can do what many teams have failed to do over the past 2 years and attempt to dismantle our spectacular defence?
Oh, it was interesting you asked, it was a great interview, by the way, you did with Brodie Grundy, and you asked him about Goody's emphasis and I guess the cornerstone of his football philosophy is about defence.
Yeah.
Whether that was something he had to relearn, and how did it compare to McRae? And his comment was interesting that all teams have got it's where defence first, and so I was thinking about that, but maybe there's degrees because I think there's defence first and there's defence first, because if you look at the way Collingwood played last year, they go, and we'll talk about the teams that go up and down, and spoiler alert, I think Collingwood will go down.
Me too, but yeah.
Partly because is that their weakness last year was, it was their inability to prevent opposition scoring in bursts, and which was a weakness of ours at one point. Certainly was in 2017-18. It was, in 2018, it was really the reason that we struggled in the first half of the season. We just couldn't stop teams getting on a run, and it was interesting if you think back to 2018. Goody was a very aggressive coach. He had those players coming off, same in 2017, off the half-back flank, doing those, taking advantage of that rule, very fast ball movement. In many ways, I feel like the 2018 D side had shared some similarities with the Collingwood side last year, really philosophically, move the ball. But the problem in 2018 was the same problem that Pies had last year, was that we got hurt on the rebound. The best teams hurt us on the rebound and could string 3, 4, 5 goals together. And then Goody, I think he shifted, as Grundy said, that all teams want to focus on defence. But I think Goody shifted from that season to almost underpin everything is stop the opposition scoring, still be able to be offensive. So we've talked a lot about our offense is often a function of our defense. It rebounds off the halfback flank. And I think that was a big shift in Goody's thinking. And of course, we went out and specifically targeted players, Lever and May in particular, to build a system around, and that ability to zone. And we've talked a lot about our system over the last couple of years. But really, it's based on a zone defense, but they know each other really well and prepared to zone off and take the risks. And that takes time to build. And you can see it in the teams that are coming up now and, are on the way up, hopefully for them. Even a side like Freo, who, it takes time for those defensive systems to gel, for players to instinctively know where everyone is. But also the other part of Goody's philosophy, and I guess this is all teams in terms of, is the all-team defence. So, you hear him talk about it all the time. In fact, it's almost his go-to is, yes, we've got the back six, that's important, but it's really the ability of everyone to do the work to get back and to get forward as well. So, players like Nibbler and Spargo and now Hunter and pushing back into defence to help out and create an outnumber. And for me, that's that it's super important, because if the game does go quicker, and kudos to Collingwood, you might remember last year about when we were about 10-1 or 9, and the big conversation in the media was, how do you stop Melbourne? And we had that conversation on the podcast, and all three of us from memory was the answer is you've got to play fast. Like, it was clear playing slow against us wasn't going to work.
We get to time to set up, and that's your goal.
Yeah, exactly. Time to set up. And I think Collingwood, and probably to a lesser extent Swans, in the beginning of the season, they recognised that the only way to beat Melbourne, you can't beat Melbourne by playing slow. And the best example of that was Port, that pathetic, at half time they'd gone inside 50, like 5 or 6, whatever it was. They only scored 2 goals at half time. After that, teams started attacking us, and Collingwood wasn't too long after that and moving the ball quick. And, we said it, you and I and George said it, the only way really of the methods to beat us is to move it quick and not allow us to set up that zone defence, but critically, as you just said, not allow players to get back and fold back. And so the other thing that meant, and Collingwood were really good at it, Sydney were really good at it as well, is that they were consciously, I think, try to separate Petty, Lever and May to make it more difficult for them to zone off their player to help out one another. And so, get the ball moving quickly and stretch that defence. I think that worked really well. And quite a few times, in that latter part of the season, we struggled they created a lot of one-on-ones, the opposition. We struggled in that environment with that ability to zone. So I suspect that they've worked on that. They'll recognise that was something that oppositions did really well against our defence. So I'm sure they will have spent lots of time working out alternative systems. So maybe it isn't always Petty coming across to help Lever. Maybe it's Rivers coming across to help Lever. Maybe more work on their one-on-one ability. Just on that, I saw some criticism of Petty getting outmarked a couple of times by the young recruit. And it made me laugh because it's like, since when in footy ever has a tall defender never got beaten in marking contest? And particularly when you create one-on-one. So those examples given, I think it was Brad Johnson on one of the footy preview of, he made that comment. It's like, come on, you move the ball quick enough, you're going to create one-on-ones.
And what they didn't take into account was that was right at the end of the match, and I'm not saying he took the guy lightly or anything, but we'd comprehensively beaten them. It was bloody hot that day down there, and it was, as I said, end of the game.
Well, and he'd come on. He'd only been on for a quarter.
And that guy was fresh. So, Petty had been playing all day in the heat, and I'm not using that as an excuse, but we'd comprehensively beaten them in a practice match where we had been intense all day. They weren't as intense, and you got a couple of goals at the end. I've got no problem with that. If that happens week in, week out, all right, we might have a problem, Harrison Petty, but I don't have a problem with that.
Like I say, the thing is, defenders will be outmarked, and they'll get outmarked more often when they get one-on-ones. It's just the way it is. So the oppositions will be looking to minimise our ability to zone off and to not so much take May or Lever or Petty out of the game, but more take their influence, ability to screen off. And the only way really to do that is to have them just, wide enough apart that they just literally can't get across to the marking contest. So we can expect more one-on-one contests, which will, we will get outmarked sometimes, but the same is true at the other end. And it's interesting because the Dogs are going for a tall forward line. We're going for a tall forward line. Richmond have had, they've had at least a couple of talls up there for a while now, but Rewald, if you count him as a tall, and they've got their ruckman pushing back and Lynch. Carlton as well, obviously, tall forward line. So the thing about your tall forward line is you want to get the ball in quick. You want to isolate your defender. Our systems do rely on that zone. So I think that we'll get opened up sometimes. We'll give up some goals if that ball's moving quickly one-on-one. But I think, May's super strong. I thought he was super impressive on Lynch after getting maybe outpointed a little bit early. But again, that's a good example. Lynch is a quality footballer. He's going to outmarket the best of them. I think in terms of our defence this year, just drilling down a bit, so obviously Petty, Lever and May, they're now this is Petty's third season in their sort of full-time back role. May and Lever have obviously got a brilliant relationship. I'm sure they will have worked on over the summer their one-on-one ability, but also what are their strategies when they can't zone off and get to that contest? So Rivers, Gus. I think it's really important I really hope Gus plays most of his time down back, because I think that we lost a bit when he moved into the midfield, and in partly because of how many he was leading the intercept marks, I think, at the halfway stage of last season. He's really important because he he might be that player that zones off and gets to those contests. He might be the one who can take those intercepting marks if the talls can't get across. So he might be a player and Rivers for that matter, who become important when we do get caught out because of the opposition's ball movement. One of the things that was really impressive with Richmond is they did move the ball really quickly. And at one point in the first quarter, I was really surprised to see they had 5 more inside 50s than us. I watched the first quarter again. I tried to watch it all, but didn't have time before tonight. They got the ball in at one point. I think it was at the 15-minute mark. There were at least 4 or 5 times more. But when I thought about those entries, I couldn't think of one really clean, sharp entry. Even though we had less inside 50s, we looked the more likely to score. And I mean, we were 2 goals up at that point. So already, or it might have been 3. And that was because we were able to get our numbers back. So even with, we talked about it last week, is getting the players outnumbering. And I think that what's important about that is you get, obviously you win more ground balls when you outnumber. It's a huge thing for us. But it creates opportunities for Bowie to get the ball in his hand, and he's such an important distributor. I really compare the way he plays to the way Caleb Daniel plays for the Dogs. Quarterback's a bit of an overused role, but more of someone who's reliably going to hit that 25-metre kick. He's not going to turn over the half back line. If it's on, he can take an aggressive kick into the centre, but if it's not, he'll hit that next target. But the ball kept on getting spat back out the back to him. So it's clearly the role that they've got in mind for him. McVeigh, I know there's a question, maybe there's a question now about that small defender I think I saw, Andy, like who's going to play in the smalls. But my sense is McVeigh's going to be the answer to that. So I don't know if you wanted to read that question out now.
Well, yeah, we'll take that just 1 second, so I can attribute it to the poster who's provided the question. Okay. Who will be our defender? This is from Pew Pew Pew, who asks, who will be our defender who takes the opposition's dangerous small forward, the Papleys, the Stengels, the Camerons, etc. Judd McVeigh looks set to debut in round 1. Is Hibberd done? I don't think we should write him off just yet, but I feel a big statement was made not playing him in the Pracky matches. And big man, I guess you write off Hibberd at your own peril. So who's going to be the man to take Charlie Cameron in round 2? And I guess we've got Papley in round 3.
Well, so I think it's a great question. I'm not writing Hibbo off, but I don't think he'll be in the round 1 team. I think, obviously they'll manage that, but he's a player that you can, well, just like he did in the finals last year, near the back end of the season, you can bring in and rely that he will do the job. So I think it's a great question because it is our defensively, I think it's our biggest issue is we've never really had a replacement for Jets. Jets in 2018, he had that fantastic season. We've never had a player who you could week in, week out take the Camerons, and that's who we would. Hibbo did a good job at different times. Hunt was tried in that position. It just wasn't a natural, really. Took away his strengths as well, Hunt. I heard Goody talk about, this is probably another classic coaching cliche, I guess, but playing players to their strengths. So you need a player who plays that role, is good at it, but is playing to their strengths. And, I think the short answer is that's the role that they've got McVeigh penciled in for.
That's McVeigh.
McVeigh, I should say. He took Dusty last week, and in the first practice game, he took Higgins. Played them tight, but also it wasn't like a tagging role, pushed off them, got up the ground, got high, using his kicks. I think he's going to be exactly that player. Tall enough to play on a player as big as Dusty. He obviously not as strong as Dusty. And short enough to take a Higgins. So that means Cameron's in the frame. All of those players Pew mentioned just then. I think, he's Judd's I'm going to stick with Judd now because
that'll get you. You'll be
Judd M.
New swallow.
Yeah, that's right, new swallow. So I think he's the player that they've got for that. And I think, which is important because Salem's going to come back in, isn't he? He's going to come back into that team. Yep. So we can't be just fully playing the Salem role. And then I think he'll slot back in. Question would be who comes out. Rivers, I think, is the role that if thinking of players playing to their strengths, his strengths is that run and carry in a way. Maybe he's playing the role that Hunt his best footy, running hard off the halfback flank. He's not a great kick over a short distance because he turns it over Rivers, but he's a brilliant kick over 50, 60 metres. And you want him taking the ball, you want him running 15, 20 metres, maybe the halfback flank, he runs 10 metres with it and kicks it. And suddenly it's 75 metres from where he collected the ball. It's at our half-forward flank. It's a huge part of, another philosophical thing for Goody, or part of his coaching philosophy, is get territory. And so I think Rivers is really important in that because he can reliably get territory. May similarly, I hate his kicking over 15, 20 metres, like that turnover that he kicked against Brisbane. That's the point about the more aggressive style of football, is you put it in the wrong player's hands and it costs you a game of footy. And it cost us that game of footy, arguably. Maybe that's over-egging the pudding, but the momentum changed completely right at the end of that first half, when he turned it over cheaply under no pressure, a 15-metre kick, and he missed it, and it gave them a goal. So I don't want to see him doing that, but I love his 60-metre kicks. So again, he plays on from. They give him 15 metres after he runs out of the square. He kicks at 60 metres. It's 80 metres from our goal. So those two players are important from their depth kick. I think Bowser, it's a really, who knows whether it might just become one of those truisms of footy, but they talk about it all the time, don't they? The second year blues. And so I'll be really curious to see how Nick Dacos goes this year, because it's his second year. But who knows whether that's just a myth. But certainly in Bowser's case, it wasn't a myth, because he had such a brilliant first year. I thought he was a touch unlucky to get dropped, to be honest, last year, but he wasn't playing at the same level. But let's hope he will. These two practice games have been brilliant. I said Gus is super important. Love the fact that he gets good depth as well. Should not be underestimated how important it is. Gus can kick properly, both feet, and kick long. A lot of right footers who are okay on the left foot often can't kick long on their left foot, just the 20, 30 metre kicks. He can kick long off both feet, which is why it's important, is because it gives us two options in terms of which lane we take. So whilst we'll be crossing more, whilst we'll be going to the corridor more often and corridor back out, we won't be crossing the ball, as we talked about last week. But Gus gives us that ability of which lane to choose. Which lane do we want to start in with that left-right foot? I think Petty's an All-Australian, and I'd be super surprised if he's not an All-Australian in the next 2 seasons, 3 seasons. Even this year wouldn't surprise me. I think he's just a brilliant defender. He's so competitive. He just wants the ball. He would have been gutted about those comments from Johnson, like, give me a break. He's a competitive fella. I think that they've got a synergy there that's been built over 4 or 5 years. So there's not massive changes. Judd is maybe the only change of any regular. I think Gus settles them down. I think we've got the best defence in the AFL, which it's going to be always critical. But if the game does get faster, it's going to be the teams with the ability to get back and the systems that are going to be able to protect from those fast breaks. That's why as I say, concerned about Collingwood's ability to back up, because they gave up goals on the rebound. We're going to be in a good position because we have got such a good system. They know across the whole ground, but everyone knows what they're doing. They know their role. It's going to be a good mitigation against the ball moving quickly, and again, the best defences win. So it shouldn't be forgotten, though, that point about how much of our scoring bounces off the halfback flank, and Goody talks about it all the time. So whilst defence is important, it's also important to think about defence's role in our offense. I think that it's fantastic that this group of players are rolling again. I'm just a little bit worried about Salo in terms of the thyroid. I just amazed how I just feel like he's an underrated player. He's such an important player. We missed him so much last year in terms of his influence. He just wasn't as influential on the game when he came back. Obviously, he had interrupted. He had an injury, so that's no surprise. But last year, if you consider Bowie was out of the team and down on form, same for Salem. They're of two of our back set back six are not in there, that's a huge reduction in productivity, isn't it?
And two of the best kicks in the team.
Two of the best kicks in the team, absolutely. So, it's really important that Bowie plays regularly. I can't wait for Salo to get back. I think Judd will stay in the side. And then, of course, you've got the seventh. They talk about the back seven. You've got the other players like who are pushing back, but the Harms and the Swallows, and who are sort of maybe rolling back and playing that half-back utility role. And, of course, the Nibblers and Spargo, as I mentioned before, who push back and help out.
All right, well, let's move on to the midfield, and there's absolutely no doubt that we have one of the finest midfields in the competition, led by Captain Max Gawn. Oliver is one of the league's preeminent midfielders. His outstanding ball-winning ability and lightning-fast clearance work is unrivaled in the competition. Then you got Christian Petrarca's combination of speed, strength and skill, with his ability to break tackles and burst through packs and contribute to the scoreboard, makes him one of the most exciting and dynamic players in the AFL. Add Jack Viney, who brings that tenacity, grunt, the work ethic and leadership. He's a ferocious tackler, and he's regarded as one of the toughest footballers in the league. Waiting in the wings, we've got Tom Sparrow, who looks to have built his upper body strength over the summer, and he most certainly will be the next in line to break into that star-studded midfield on a more permanent basis. We'll probably see him in a lot more, attending a lot more centre bounces this season. And as noted in the preseason, we're also going to be seeing Cozzy with his speed and agility, and he's got that uncanny ability to evade opposition and use his skill to break through defences, create scoring opportunities. And it's going to be great seeing that sort of utilised in spurts in the midfield, just to offer that point of difference. And a lot's been said about the Demons' need to sort of spread the midfield load around, and add some depth, adaptability and flexibility to the midfield. We've got a plethora of players that can fill now multiple roles in this regard. James Harms with a bit of a tagging role at times. We've got that option. Angus Brayshaw, I know, B-Man, you don't want him going from defence, but he can go into the midfield mix. We've got James Jordan, probably going to be utilised more of a sub, but he can go in there. Alex Neil-Bullen, and now also Trent Rivers can also be called up to add to the midfield mix. So it's going to be very important that we sort of spread the load around so that our stars can get some rest in games, and that's going to sort of keep them in good stead throughout the long season. And our midfield is, of course, complemented by our new look outstanding ruck lineup, our premiership and multiple All-Australian captain, who is the premier ruckman of the competition probably over the last half decade. He dominates games in the air. He's now joined by his one-time rival in Brodie Grundy, and the pair, they're set to form a formidable ruck combination that's going to stretch most oppositions as they're able to drift forward. And we've seen they've been able to hit the scoreboard. I'm not expecting 6 goals between them every week, but that would be a nice start. But they're also able to drift back, a kick behind the ball to pick off any quick kicks out of our forward line from turnovers. On the wings, we've added another piece to this exciting midfield puzzle with the acquisitions of Lockie Hunter. He joins Ed Langdon, and this pair will form a dynamic combination, giving the Ds that added speed, skill and endurance, and not to mention some excellent disposal and efficiency going forward, in particular from Hunter. So that's our midfield, and I think it's the best in the competition, and so do a lot of pundits. And I think what I would like to see more from them is scoreboard pressure off their own boots. Some of the best midfields over the past 20 or 30 years have included players who aren't just impacting at the stoppages, they're generating scoring opportunities, but also damaging oppositions off their own boot with their own scoring abilities. And for me, that's what I want to see more of from our midfield. B-Man, anything you want to add about our midfield, in particular from a tactical perspective?
It's really interesting. I watched earlier today 360, and the coach had Hardwick on, and he was asked about Hopper and Taranto coming in, and what was interesting about what he said is that was their biggest issue for the last few years. They've never been strong in it, is contested ball and clearance. And that it's, he didn't say this, but it's obviously increased. It's not got better for them in the last couple of years. And it really represents the gap between them and us essentially is our ability to win the contest and that post-clearance possession, which he was the first coach I started hearing about post-clearance, the importance of winning the post-clearance possession. We're winning those balls because we've got those midfielders that you just talked about. Of course, he didn't say he did say we brought Taranto in and Hopper to address that issue, to win more contested ball in clearances and stoppages, in post-clearance possessions. What was interesting about he said is he was asked about how they're going, and he said it takes time. He said even though they're great players, and they are two fantastic players, Taranto in particular, they're both really good players. So kudos to them for getting into the club. But Harbeck's point is that they haven't got the synergy. They've been at the footy club now all pre-season, so they've been training for whatever it is, 4 months, 3.5 months, and still haven't found their synergy. The point I'm sort of getting to is that new mix of different players, that Melbourne are running through, it's not good his style to have tried that last year in the hope that it would work. He will have trialed that all summer, and set up their plays, the same team going in. They would have spent hours, literally maybe, hundreds of hours of practicing those routines to get the synergy right. So, if they can get that right, I think it does add a different mix. It's also interesting what Uze said post the Richmond game about they recognised that, track and was limping towards the finals last year, and that as you said, to give those players a chop out. I think it's good though because it creates energy, brings players like Cozzy into the game, and Rivers. I'm not convinced that Rivers will spend that much time in the middle. He doesn't look a natural.
Well, they did that in the St Kilda game, and then we saw in the Richmond game he attended one centre bounce. So I'm not sure they've shelved it, but they were trialling it, and maybe you'll here and there.
Yeah,
jump in.
I think with the things to look for with the mids in terms of stats and numbers is forget hit outs, forget the raw numbers. It's about, as we were talking about last week, it's about how good quality are they? Like, do you score from them? If the opposition get them, win the clearance, can you put enough pressure on them to make their next kick under pressure, so then our defensive system goes to work? So, I mean, that's a good example of what I was saying before, is it's, whilst you can talk about a defensive unit, it's an all-team defense. So that's what happened in the back half of last season. In the second half is that our defense started getting, we were giving up goals and one-on-one marking and that, splitting Petty and Lever and May. That's made much more of an issue when the ball getting kicked in isn't under pressure. And that happens when you're falling away and you're not fit enough to keep going. So again, multiple players at the contest, put them on pressure, force a dump kick, and then we mop it up is a really important, part of the way we play. There goes my dog. Telling me to stop.
All right. We'll move on to George has taken the forward. He was tasked with taking on our forward line, and I'll read what he's just sent in. So this is George's voice. I'm not going to try and imitate him. Much talk on Demonland about who plays forward with T-Mac, Ben Brown and JVR all pushing for a key forward role. Fritsch and Pickett are welded into their roles, and while Pickett has been slated for more midfield time, this will only be in short bursts, so the chance for others like Chandler will arise during games, exactly as we saw in the Richmond practice match. The reality is Big Ben Brown is struggling with knee problems and will not play all the games, so JVR will get plenty of chances when Benny is inevitably rested. The other option is we can play multiple tools, even 3, because of the change with the substitution / 23-man opportunity. For example, play Ben Brown for 3 quarters and then JVR for the last to introduce him slowly. But I suspect JVR will make a mark very early and will move past Ben Brown early in the piece. Regardless, injury will be a big factor, and we saw last year how it ruined our finals chances. So that was from George, and I just saw a comparison of the Melbourne's 2022 season with and without Tom McDonald. So they've done some percentage differences. So our average points for was 12, nearly 13% less without Tom McDonald. Our average points against was almost 34% more. So we had 34% kicked on us without Tom McDonald. Our inside 50s were down nearly 10%. Average marks inside 50 was actually up 1.4%, but average scoring shots was down 14%, and average goal assists was down 8%. So we really did struggle a lot, and the numbers don't lie. So that was all without Tom McDonald. And look, towards the end of the season, we had some other issues, and maybe they got tired and maybe more banged up. But those numbers without Tom.
As much as his ability, obviously he was one of our leading goal kickers. Second, I think he was second in 21, wasn't he, or something?
Yep.
Or third. Yep. So you've got to find those goals, which we didn't. So that's one problem. But it's a structural problem. That was where we missed him, because it meant that we didn't have that second tall. Our system is built around a second tall. You can see we've even gone a third tall this season. It's how important the idea of having talls up forward is to the way Goody wants to play. But it's also, just watching that Richmond game, it's the amount of running he does up that wing. We couldn't ever replace it. It had a whole lot of flow-on effects. And one of them is that they targeted Gorney more. One of the big important things about having Grundy in the team, I think, is Jackson isn't good enough, strong enough to protect Gorney in marking contests. Doesn't use his body naturally. I think Grundy does, and will not only provide them two options from the kick out. Maybe it won't always be to the right side. It'll always be to a tall if it's long, but it could be Grundy and Gorn. But the thing is about T-Mac is he gets up there. He gets to those contests on the half-back flank, and he couldn't, obviously, when he wasn't playing. But that left Brown to do that donkey work. And so how often was Brown marking or contesting the ball up on our half-back flank and have to turn around and get down the other end?
And then wasn't down the other end.
Wasn't on the end and was shattered. Yeah. And, I mean, he's not brilliant one-on-one in wrestling. It's not his go. But imagine adding exhaustion to that. So, it was a huge out.
And people are critical of Ben Brown because of that, but Ben Brown is a much, much better player when Tom McDonald's there, when Gordon, if you have all of them.
Exactly.
You've got the other two guys if Gordon's down there, they have to put a good guy on him. Yeah. You have to put a good guy on Tom McDonald. You have to put a good guy on Ben Brown. And it really spreads opposition teams thin. You can't put some short guy on Ben Brown. He'll carve you to pieces. Yeah. But you take Tom McDonald out, you have a tired Gawn having to rest there and play as a forward as well. Exactly. It's not going to work. So this year's going to be invariably different as a result of, provided we're all fit. So,
and they've doubled down on it. So they're going to be playing Gawn or Grundy up there a fair chunk of the time, it would seem. And then you've got your two talls, and they've got JVR. I'm not convinced that George will be right in terms of
I don't
how early in the day that JVR will come into the team. I don't think, but he's there. I mean, that's a really interesting question about how long can you not play him? When do you start hurting his development as a footballer? But leaving that question aside, last year, Wiedemann unfortunately wasn't the answer, and they didn't want to risk maybe JVR's development or whatever, so they didn't bring him in. Maybe he wasn't strong enough, whatever their call was. But this year we've got a third tall there already, so if one drops out, we've still got two call, and we can bring JVR in. So we hopefully won't be in the same situation we were last year. And I mean, I said it halfway through the season, my biggest concern is Tom Mack going down. It's how it panned out. This year I don't have the same, because if he does go down, we've got replacements, haven't we?
And there's Shaki as well.
And there's Shaki as well. And my smoky for a selection this year is the Will Varell, because I was super impressed with him and in the Saints game, and he's probably a long way away from being, but in case of emergency, we've got a second ruck to come in. If one of those rucks come out, at least we've got a big who can come in. When Majak Daw retired last year, that was it. We didn't have a backup ruckman. So if Jackson was out, we were stuffed. If Gorm was out, we were stuffed as well. So they've done really well to cover that. And so, hopefully we're not exposed in the same way that we could have been last year and ended up being.
Did you happen to see what I posted on Demonland? I tagged you about the D's posted a thing about Will Varell. you obviously
No, I didn't see it because
Okay.
I've been away all weekend.
Okay, so you made the call on this podcast that Will Varell was a spitting image separated at birth of Jack Fitzpatrick. Do you remember making that call?
Fitzpatrick 2.0.
So Jack Fitzpatrick has posted a photo of him and Will Varell, separate photos, but looking the same. And he said, "I'm just happy this generation's look up to me." And I don't know if you can.
Oh my God, I can, yes.
In the photo.
Wow.
Go to Melbourne's Twitter for anyone listening. That's obviously not good radio, me showing Bin Man a photo through the camera. But Melbourne's on Twitter or Facebook, wherever, posted a photo of Will Varell side by side, separated at birth with Jack Fitzpatrick. So, Bin Man, you called that weeks ago on this podcast.
Did Jack Fitzpatrick note that it is Will Varell's much better looking though?
No, he just said, "I'm happy that this generation look up to me," meaning same haircut, same hairstyle. So there you go.
So we've got protection, and I think obviously partly there, that was a good, that was a good risk mitigation strategy, bringing in, the Grundy for a whole range of reasons, but it protects us from that risk again. And for me, that was the difference. It was the big issue that we had last year was him going out. That changed the flow of the season completely.
All right, let's go on. George hasn't been able to join us for the past few weeks, so before we move on to our predictions about which teams will rise and which teams will fall, George wanted to relay a few observations that he had noticed from attending training over the pre-season, and I'll get any comments that you might have. His first one was the speed of movement. So at training, this is George's voice, imagine this. At training in match simulations, all players were given a 3 count to move the ball on from a mark or free kick. This stops the opposition setting up or flooding back quickly. Collingwood used this tactic successfully last year, and it will not be surprising to see other teams using this tactic in response. However, it is also dependent upon skilled disposal, which we have seen improve in recent times, much to Bin Man's delight. And I'll just expand on George's observations because I saw this too. So anytime a player marked the ball or were awarded a free kick in a match simulation drill, one of the assistants would immediately loudly count down 3, 2, 1, and the player would have to quickly release the ball. And I guess this is conditioning them, not just the player with the ball to get ready and quickly look for an option, but it's also conditioning the players up the field, further afield to set up and get ready to quickly receive the ball. And as George mentioned, the added benefit is that it doesn't allow the opposition enough time to effectively set up or flood back, particularly when we are going forward. And whilst we won't always see this aggressive ball movement, I think we will be seeing a lot of it mixed into our repertoire. So there will be that 3, 2, 1, quickly get rid of it. That doing the count, they're going to have a countdown in their head, but the whole countdown was just conditioning, get it and give it, get it and give it, move it on.
And that's the thing about, particularly for a coach like Goody, who's so system focused, is to do a role, everyone has to learn that role until the point that it becomes
second
completely
nature.
Unconscious.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you pointed out we talked about it a few weeks ago, the other drill of players in groups of 3 or 4 in a wave running deliberately to a marking contest that gets dropped and hitting the ball and someone collecting it and feeding it to, like in rugby.
Right? George talks about this in a second, yeah.
Right. So that what you were saying before in that 3, 2, 1 is an alert to players up the ground and to get ready to position themselves up forward. It's also alert for 3 or 4 players running, and so that's the really interesting thing about why I keep coming back to fitness is the crucial thing. And you could see that against Richmond. Richmond tried to play our way, is they ran out of puff. And I watched the North Melbourne Freo game, and North Melbourne completely ran out of puff. But Freo you could just see it was like multiple players at the contest, that wave running. If you can get that, that's where those chain of handballs, they're really exciting to watch. And I was surprised when I watched that first quarter again. And I also watched all the goals from the Richmond today, is how many goals we got where we had chains of handballs around it. I was, in my mind, for some reason, was thinking we weren't handballing as much, but lots of long handballs still like we were doing last year. Last year, I felt they were to get out of the space. These handballs were still long and going forward, so territory, but they were really, spreading them wide. And that was those 3 or 4 players you mentioned running past the contest. So you've got to combine those things. You can't just move quick, because you've got to have options. the thing about that is you get only one player is likely to get it or two. So you've got two players who have done, quote unquote, unrewarded in the sense that no one sees what they did. They may not get the ball, but the other benefit of that running is that once the ball sweeps forward, they've pushed all the way up to the half forward flank. So if it rebounds out, they're part of that wall that we set up and bounce it back in.
All right. George then goes on saying, talking about our forward entries, this was only noticed late in the preseason. If a player is forced to dump kick it into the forward line, i.e. there are no leading targets or the kicker is under tackling pressure, then the kick is made as deep as possible, but more importantly is kicked high in the air with some hang time. This gives the tall forwards a better chance in marking, however slight, but it also enables the half-forward flanks and wings to fold in to cover the opposition should they gain possession. Then it creates a crumbing chances close to goal, which are the forte of Pickett and Fritsch. P.S. We will still be kicking to the pockets, much to the annoyance of many.
Yeah, I think we will when there's the percentage play, but it would clear or also be kicking more often to the top of the square, which again, that's why the three tools are important, because you can't really do that too often without having your tools up there. It'll be interesting to see how the Dogs enter 50. The other thing about that is that if it's crowded, in that example where I said it spits out of our defense and comes back in because we've set up the wall, it comes back into a crowded forward line. So it's going to go to the pockets in those scenarios because that's where the space is. Just quickly, you mentioned Cozzy and Spargs and that pressure up forward, Chandler as well. That's going to be critical because, as we talked about last week and a couple of weeks ago as well, that pressure up forward was lacking last season in the first half of the season, arguably never quite got to the level it needs to be. They've put that on the agenda as something that they want to fix this year, which is our forward pressure. And so when it hits the ground, we've got to win our share of those, a good share of those ground balls and put the score on the board. So it's going to be really interesting what they do with Chandler in terms of that if Cozzy's got more minutes, but forward pressure is going to be super important.
All right, I should have actually included this question from Borgzilla just after we talked about the lines. So now that we've gone through all the lines, and Borgzilla wants to know which is our strongest line this year. Looks like our back line will again be strong, but I think the flexibility in our mids will confuse some teams. And I reckon that's a tough question. It's definitely between our midfield and our defence. Our midfield is just so solid. Our starting four mids would also be the starting four mids in almost any team. I'm convinced of that. I don't have rose-coloured glasses on, I don't think. I've certainly never experienced an engine room quite like what we've been blessed with over the past few years. Hopefully the flexibility that adding some more strings to the bow in the midfield that adds will take that midfield to another level. Having said that, our defence over the past 2 years has been stellar. Keeping teams to under 70 points almost on a weekly basis goes a very long way to ensuring victory. So it's a toss of the coin for me what our best line is, Big Man.
Well, that's a really interesting question because I was thinking about that today and I read the question when you sent it through, and then after that I watched all the goals and the first quarter again of the Richmond practice game, and my answer afterwards was it's the midfield. And it's amazing because I don't know whether you get used to these things but I also listened to an interview with Track and thought, God, he's turned into such an impressive man, young man. Like, compared to how he was, he's always impressive, but his public speaking ability and his ability to be thoughtful and think about the game and straightforward, I mean, is super impressive. He's just a star, and it's possible he could be better this year. And so if he gets better, and he was asked about Oliver, has he ever seen Oliver in better shape? And the answer is no. And so he was saying that they'll push each other on. Oliver looks incredible shape. And then I thought, well, you've got Oliver, who's arguably the best midfielder I've ever seen. And the other one is Track, who's arguably the best midfielder ever seen. You said before Maxi's, arguably the best ruck in the last 5 years. There's a big case to say he's one of the best rucks of all time.
I know.
I mean, his record is phenomenal. His leadership, his ability, his marking.
6 All-Australians.
Oh, exactly.
How many people have 6 All-Australians or more,
Well, if he's fit, he's a Monty to win it this year, isn't he? So he's a Monty to be another All-Australian. I mean, it's hard to see him not being an All-Australian at the moment. So if you think you've got 3 All-Australian locks, and then you haven't even discussed Viney yet.
Yeah.
It's like it's got to be the midfield in terms of pound for pound quality. That's a dream midfield, but certainly the best midfield in the entire time I've followed Melbourne, which is a long time.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at in the last 30 years, there's only been a few teams where when you look over the years and they single out the best midfielders of that year, where you've got two in the top five every time. Maybe Hawthorn with Hodge and Mitchell, maybe West Coast with Cousins and Kerr or whatever. And in that period, maybe Voss and Ackermanis, but there's only a couple, and we're in that thing. We just now need to win a couple premierships to seal the deal, or Brownlows.
Exactly, that's what gets the history books. And I was thinking, well, what's the comparable midfield? And it's Brisbane's midfield during their three-peat.
But we need to put the runs on the board while we're there.
Yeah, exactly.
To be talked about like that. They are that good, but history books.
Good question, Borgazilla, and I gave it a fair bit of thought, and my answer is the midfield.
All right, so let's move on. Predictions, which teams we'll try and run through these because we've got a lot of questions after this. So that's our predictions of which teams will rise. I'll start. As much as it pains me to predict this, I think Carlton will be a team to rise this season. Not only do I think they'll make the 8, they should have made the 8 last season, and I'm so happy that we had a hand in ending their season, but I think they will probably climb into top 4 contention this year. I think they're still missing a few key components in the small forward department, perhaps on the wings, and definitely I think in defence, which I think is their weakest line, but they have the nucleus of a very good side, and up forward they have two of the best, if not to the two best forwards in the competition. Both McKay and Curnow are capable of well in excess of 60 goals a season. Either of them, under the right circumstances, either one of them probably could get close to breaking the ton, if that's possible in this modern era. In the middle, they have two superstars in Brownlow medalist Cripps and young Walsh. They're ably supported by Chera, Kennedy and Doherty. In a move that mirrors the D's acquisition of Langdon, the Blues acquired Akers on the wing, and whilst I don't rate him on Langdon's level, these are the types of trades and acquisitions that the Blues need to make to fill in some of the holes in their lineup like we've done over the past few years. Probably need to target sort of a key defender as well, like we've got May and Lever. But my big question mark is their defence. Jacob Wederen's a good defender. Look, last year they did concede over 75 points about 13 times, over 96 times. I think they'll improve on last season. And as we know, a good defence is the genesis of it all. If the Blues can tidy up that part of the game, they'll no doubt become a strong team, and definitely in the years to come. So as much as I hate to say it, I think they're going to be up there. Big man, who's your team?
Not the Blues, because I just think that, like I've said ad infinitum, the fitness is so critical these days, and they've had a super interrupted preseason.
They have. Yep.
Walsh out is massive. So it's not just the problem that he's out. He basically didn't do any running. Yep. So he's never going to be – this whole season's a write-off for him in terms – he'll never get to the fitness that he was last year. It's not possible. So he's basically their best player, I reckon. Cripps is perhaps more impactful, but I think Walsh is their best player, most important player, because he covers so much ground. He's such a brilliant midfielder. So and also losing Williams for much of the season, I think they're in a bit of bother, to be honest, because I don't think they're going to be fit enough. Because I went through all the teams today to see what their injury status was in terms of how they went. They had a shocker, not far away from Saints. So I think they'll really struggle. So the riser for me is, I think, the Dogs.
Wow.
And I think it's going to be a Melbourne Bulldogs grand final again. I think they're a good team, well coached. I think Beveridge is an excellent coach. He is prepared to change. It's really interesting. They've gone for tools up forward. They're going to forward genuine, very mobile forwards. Darcy, Ugle-Hagan, of course, Norton, and who's the fourth one? Lob from they've brought in, who will obviously give English a chop out. Interestingly, that's a pretty tall setup. Lob's 6'6", I think, or something like that. And the other fella who always cuts us up is gone back in defence, Bruce, which is interesting. So that's something different. But the talk is that they're going to be playing more direct. By that, I think it just means it's shorthand for territory, get it forward quick, but also place it in straight channel. So they'll still what they won't do as much as in the past, it would seem, is switch the ball across the ground, because I think it's a dead strategy. They'll still move the ball through hands, but and into the corridor, but it'll be corridor back to one of the lanes as opposed to switching. This phenomenon that seems to happen of teams getting the beaten grand finalists is struggling the next year. For that reason, I think Swans, might struggle. The teams that get smashed in those grand finals psychologically struggle to come up. They are in the same situation that us, a shortened pre-season at the end of 21 into 22, had lots of injuries. They've changed some personnel, including Hunter leaving. I just think that they've settled. They will have got their defensive systems working a bit better, hopefully. So I could see them being a real bolter. I think they'll finish top four, and I reckon we'll end up playing them in the grand final.
Yeah, we had a lot of people pick them as a team to fall, so that'll be interesting to watch. George has he's given his 2 cents. He says, don't take any notice of what I say. After all, last year I thought Essendon would rise. That didn't, and 8 happening whilst the likes of Stringer hang around and the recruiting team go chasing potential X-factor players instead of solving their defensive problems for a start. So I'll give it another go. So there is something to laugh about come season's end. He's chosen Brisbane. Already challenging the top, they have recruited well. Dunkley to the midfield/forward fills a need, and their father-son pick Ashcroft is top-notched. He should have been number 1 draft pick regardless. And while they lost McStay to Collingwood, Gunston comes in. Although he's not half the player he used to be, he'll pick up cheap goals behind being number 3 forward to Hipwood and Danaher. So he's chosen Brisbane. Well, they're going to be up there.
Well, I've just got a bit of a pedant question here for you, and it is like, where they finished third last. I mean, when George thinks they're going to rise, what, to second or?
I don't know if he.
I mean, that's not much of it. Like rise, I'm picking a team that wasn't in the 8 to
you did,
playing in the grand final.
No, Bulldogs made the 8, didn't they? Didn't they sneak in?
They?
Oh, I can't remember. Did they miss out?
I don't know. Oh, they did. Yeah, they did. They snuck in.
They snuck it in instead of Carlton.
They took Carlton. Charge.
Yeah, they took Carlton.
So they might as well not have.
Yeah.
But I think George is right. What will be interesting for me with Brisbane is their way of moving the ball was old school. Their way of playing was old school. They didn't have a defensive zone system that worked, and if they haven't sorted that, I don't see them winning a grand final. But they've got a bloody strong list. So Ashcroft looks a total star.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to which teams will fall. We've both taken Collingwood, so I'll go first. You'll have probably done more research. For me, it's just the vibe. I don't think they'll miss the 8, but I think they were very lucky in a number of matches last season. They won a record 12 matches by under a goal, and that type of luck has to run out at some point. However, you make your own luck sometimes, and they do play an aggressive, risky style of game, and that can either serve you very well, like it did for them last year, or it could bite you in the bum. And I'm betting on the latter, and I'm hoping that they fall. Having said that, I've been saying that about Geelong for various other reasons over the past decade, and they won a flag last year. So, a grain of salt if you want to take that. B-Man, you said the Pies? You said the Pies and the Swans. So give me your quick thing of the Pies and then on to the Swans.
Well, the Pies, I agree with what you said. I think their biggest issue is their defense. So they can't be giving up those runs of goals. Like people talk about the fact that they ran Geelong close in the prelim, which is true.
Not the prelim, the semi or the qualifier.
So which is true. But it's easy to forget the reason they lost that game is that they gave up shit easy goals in that last quarter, which is, like you play the full season to get your percentages, and then, as Goody says, your finals are a whole different season. And then in the crunch, under pressure, when you've got to win a game of football, they gave up 2 goals in that quarter against Geelong that cost them the game because their system fell down. And so, it doesn't really matter how close they got. Their system didn't hold up under finals pressure. So, of course, they will have worked on that. So, much will be seen how is super important for them, obviously. Darcy Moore, they've got some quality players back there, but that sort of move the ball quickly throws up the risk of getting scored on the rebound. And that's, I think that's a risky way of playing. The other thing that I think is will be really interesting to see is Nick Dacos was so important to them last year. Oppositions will go into this season having trained all pre-season about how to stop him, what strategies to put into him, how to minimise his impact. Clearly, as much pressure you can put on him as he kicks, the better, because he will be going for those risky kicks. If you can turn over a few of his kicks or make sure that he can't kick to the corridor, you take out a bit of his strengths. As you say, I think that it's just statistically they won so many close games in the end last season that, history will say that that's probably not sustainable. And they gave up too many big scores too quickly. I remember the Hawthorn time they played Hawthorn. It's like they just gave up 40 points in a heartbeat, and that's just not winning football. And that's why they reminded me so much of 2018. The best teams beat us that year. When we were on, we're irrepressible. And that's how they played last year. That's a very difficult it's a very difficult thing to sustain, that energy. You need the system to rely on. So the other thing, that big tick for them last year, was how obviously fit they were. And that really took me by surprise. That was the thing that probably surprised me the most. They were super fit. Who knows? Will they be able to back that up this year with their fitness? They've had one less pre-season. Be really interesting. I'd love to know from the club, from Collingwood, where they see themselves. Are they a genuine premiership contender? And if so, they will have gone hard, to maximise the wins, and then they'll go through the similar things that I've been talking about with the leading teams and loading. So they'll lose some matches this year that they won't have last year, because they will be in high training phases. And so hopefully that will coincide with when they play us on King's birthday.
Do you want to quickly go Swans?
I just think Swans, psychologically coming back from that flag, my own theory, to be honest, is that Geelong, Bulldogs, Melbourne, and Lions are a cut above the rest of the competition. I know that Pies did brilliantly last year. I know the Swans did too. I just think that they're, list-wise, fitness-wise, I think they're a few rungs down. I just think that's how it panned out last year. Bottom line is they got beaten by 80-plus points in the grand final. So, Geelong were a long way ahead of them. I just think that, again, that game style that they play, fast ball movement, they've got some brilliant kicking players. Goulden is just a total star, isn't he? So, I think they'll make the 8. I'm thinking Collingwood won't make the 8. That's my tip. So, I think they'll make the 8. I just don't think they'll make top 4.
Okay. George has taken the Tigers. He says trying to wring the last bit out of the lemon. They recruited the lemon. I wish I had a lemon that won 3 premierships, but they recruited Taranto and Hopper because Cochin and Dusty are well and truly finished. The problem is Taranto and Hopper are not Cochin and Martin when at their peak. Their backline is terrible, with the progressive losses of players from their premiership years, with Grimes the only genuine defender of any calibre. Our forward Lynch is now on the wrong side of 30, and Riewoldt is a shadow of his former self. The difference between the top sides and what they can produce was shown up starkly in our practice match against them. Now, you can tell that he does not like Richmond.
My resolution this year was not to get annoyed by the footy shows, and not to, which lasted about maybe I just shouldn't watch them, but I watched 360 today, and within 2 minutes they were talking about, what are they watching for or whatever. And Robbo said, his big thing that he was watching for was Dusty. And he something paraphrasing, he said that if Dusty gets back to his very best, they could win the grand final. And it was like, what era are you talking about? Since when was the last time? It's the difference between a team winning a grand final and not winning a grand final was a single player. Not long after that, Hardwick was on and was talking about the Hopper and Taranto. But he started talking about how complex the systems are and how long it takes and the complexity of everything, completely contradicting Robbo's thing about one player. The funny thing is, I don't know what he expects from Dusty, because he's not going to be a midfielder. He's going to be a forward. And unless he kicks 300 goals, he's not going to be the difference between them winning a grand final or not. And on the one one example we've seen already of him playing. He was not influential at all in that game, despite playing on Judd. I'm not going to say his last name anymore on Juddy. Juddy, here we go, Juddy. So that'll work. Gives him. I agree with what George is saying. I think they're going to struggle to. I mean, I just don't think they're going to get back to their best. They're not a grand final contender. I'll be very surprised if they make the 8. Just quickly, the other thing that Robbo said that. Well, I could only but laugh. He said, quote unquote, I wrote it down. It was, pressure is a made up word. I was like, well, aren't all words made up? What's the... It's like he's paid writer. His pressure's a made up word. I can make up a word. That's a made up word, Robbo. So, all right, well, no more football shows for me, Andy.
No,
That's it.
I think we've got
I'm
to
swearing off them.
Take away your KO membership. Let's get, before we delve into the questions posted by our listeners on demonland.com, we have a voice message from Noah, which was held over from last week as it pertained to this previous show. So here is Noah's voice message.
Hi, Demonlanders. This is Noah again from Bentley. Love the podcast. Keep on doing it. It's really insightful and very informative. Really appreciate it, guys. The question I wanted to actually pose to George was in regards to playing Melbourne players last year when they were injured. Do you think Goody has actually learnt anything from last year playing a number of players who have had some mild injuries or sort of hiding a lot of injuries? And do you think with 2023 we'll rest the older players like Gorney a little bit more and not take the risks such that we didn't get to the premiership glory? I'd like to know your feelings on that, and go D's.
I had messaged George earlier today, but I got a response very late. I sort of had attempted to answer it, and for me personally, I hope Goody, the footy department, the high performance team, and the medicos have had a good look at last season, in particular the second half of the year, and I hope they've identified some areas from an injury and player management perspective that they can perhaps improve on. Whilst, luck in terms of injuries, that plays a big part in the fortunes of a team, particularly at the pointy end of the season. Last season, the Demons were pretty banged up and tired as we headed into finals. We had a number of injuries and tired bodies by the finals. Petraka's hairline fracture of the tibia, Oliver's thumb never properly recovered from the Cats game, highlighted by the fact that he had to have surgery at the end of the year. Max Gawn had that painful hip injury, almost missed the do-or-die semi-final. Bailey Fritsch, we now know, had a knee injury that required surgery in the off-season. And whilst injuries should not be used as an excuse, it can go a long way to sort of explain some performances. And I think we could have perhaps managed the load of players better throughout the season. For example, we could have used the 2 weeks in the middle of the season, well, almost the middle of the season when we played North and West Coast to rest Max. And whilst you don't want to disrespect any sides or take them lightly, I feel that there must have been a way to spread the load throughout the season, give players an opportunity to be rested. It's evident that we'll be sharing the love in the midfield in order not to burn out our star players. And we just need to be smarter throughout the season with the management of our key players, our key position players too. Geelong successfully managed an ageing list last season and they took out a flag, so hopefully we can too. And I got the message late from George. He said, I don't think people, so Noah, you actually get George to respond to you. I don't think people appreciate the extent of the injuries we had. We couldn't rest Gawn when we should have because Jackson was also injured at the time. Majak Dor had retired, T-Mac was injured, and we were forced to use Weed. Up forward, we had to use Melksham as a full forward at the end because T-Mac and Ben Brown were both injured. At the Brisbane final, 6 players ran onto the ground with knee bandages. Cozzy was one of them, and I think Fritsch as well. We should have rested players, but we had no options. So sometimes you just don't have options.
I think that's such an important point because the inference is that we didn't do that last year, implying that we could have. And people keep bringing up Geelong, but Geelong had backups to bring in those players. So, I think that's such a good point by George, and it can't be forgotten. Which is why it's clever what they've done. They've recognised that they need to do a better job of that. So how do they give Track a chop out? You don't drop him. No. Who's going to replace Track? And Track was asked that question in the presser that I heard today about that preparation and his injury, and he said, "Look, it was interesting. He said he felt okay. and he felt, he thought he played all pretty well. He said he thought he played well in the finals. He was good to go. He said he could get through training, and he made a really interesting comment that training. He said training is harder than the game. And which was, I found amazing. He said that it's physically harder to train than it is to play the game, and he could get through training. So I think George is spot on, is that we didn't have the players, but they've been clever this year. It's a bit part of bringing Grundy in. You've got Varel. That's my point before. So, in the example of track, how do you give him more of a chop out? Well, you start rolling other players through the midfield so that he doesn't have to do as many midfield minutes, but that takes time to do. You need to train for it over summer. You need to have the right players who can do it. So they've clearly recognise that they need to find ways to get their stars through to the end of the season, but you need other players who can come in and play those roles. So
that could be the problem, because my thought is if you take away minutes from track and you take away minutes from Clary, it might extend them, but are we going to the old robbing Peter to pay Paul? Is that going to hurt us at times?
This year they can rest Max because we've got Grundy and Varel can come in, or they can just run with the one ruck for 1 week, and you've got T-Mac who can take the ruck in the throw-ins in the forward line, or even up on the half-back flank. So this year we've got the capacity to do it, and I think it's a really good point too about Jackson. Jackson was. It's easy to forget. People talk about maybe his mind was elsewhere. I don't know about that, but he wasn't as dynamic, was he, in the second half of 22 that he was in 21?
All right. RDB Hero asks, marks in forward 50 are a premium. Do Brown and McDonald hold less than other key forwards? Do we play expecting Crummers to create goals as a second option? Well, I don't really have any stats on that. Big man, what are your thoughts?
No, I was going to find out. There must be a stat on marks inside 50, but I apologise. I couldn't find it. But my feeling is the answer is no, is because like in modern footy, it's just so hard to get marks up. They're worth their weight in gold. Our marks forward 50.
Our marks inside 50 were actually up without T-Mac, very slightly, 1.4% from an average of 10.7 with him and 10.9 without him. That's the average inside 50. So I don't know, but I don't know what the inside 50s for other clubs are, particularly the good clubs. So
21, we were the leading marks inside 50, and I suspect we'll be back there again with Max and Grundy playing up forward. If the pre-season's anything to go by, Mark, I just think in modern footy with zoning, how many one-on-ones do you get? I don't think it's something we look to deliberately do, but it's why it's so important, that forward pressure and winning that ground ball, because, really if it hits 10 balls go in, you'd be happy if 2 of them get marked in a contested marking. It's probably, statistically even less. So the ball hits the deck, most times when it comes inside 50.
All right. We have a couple of questions that sort of relate to each other about who we think will debut this season. So I might lump them all in together. Bush Demon wants to know whether JVR will be getting into the 22 earlier rather than later. We sort of discussed that. Lefty says it's a good bet that Judd McVie will get a game early, if not named in round 1. JVR will surely get a look at some point in the season. Which other rookie do you guys think will debut for the Demons in 2023? And Supreme Demon asks, who of our young players are most likely to debut in season 2023? And I think you can bet the house, and disclaimer here, I won't be held liable if you lose your house on this bet, that Judd McVie will debut in round 1. I'm tipping he's playing, and we'll see in the next few days. I like what we've seen so far of him. There's good clean hands in the air and on ground level. He's got good disposal. And I mentioned a few weeks ago, he plays with a level of composure and confidence that belies his young age. I agree with what George wrote in that we'll see JVR at some stage this year, particularly in order to manage Ben Brown's knees, and he'll certainly come in if either Brown or T-Mac get injured early. I was bullish with what I saw of him at pre-season training. I like the way he goes about it, both in the air and his follow-up once the ball hits the deck. I've dialed that back a little bit based on the form and fitness of T-Mac and Brown. I think they're the best to go with early. And as I said last week, we need to temper our expectations of JVR out of the blocks. He's young. He'll be a very good player, but we have the luxury of time with him. He will play, no doubt, in 2023. The other one for mine that I think will debut this season is Wowie Jr. I liked what I saw of Taj in the limited time that we saw of him in the practice match against the Tigers. I think we'll see him play in 2023. Big man, who do you think will debut this season? Apart from those mentioned, anyone?
Well, I agree. I think Taj. I think we got an insight, didn't we, about who played in that Richmond game, and so Laurie's the other one. I don't. It's a bit hard from my perspective in terms of seeing where he's at. But the club obviously rate him. They've talked about him. They picked him in that game. So I think he's obviously on their radar, notwithstanding, I guess a little disappointed where he's at the moment. But, that's probably unfair on my part. So so he's probably one in the frame because we can see that the club have, they're thinking. I totally agree with Taj. I think I actually was really surprised at both physically the shape he was in. He looks a different player almost to last year, physique-wise, but also, as we talked about last week, he was neat, wasn't he? And he's quite composed. I think he's got a great position for that wing to come in and play that wing role so I think he might get some time. And I won't be shocked if Will Varell gets a run because, if we do need to rest Maxi, and who comes in? It can only be Will Varell.
No, I think Shaki will come in instead of him because he can play forward, he can play ruck.
And they've been training him at ruck. They've been running him as a bit of you're probably right.
He's the Wiedemann substitute. I think he's a better option than Wiedemann, and we'll see how he goes. But,
no, you're probably right. That's probably a good call. But I still won't be shocked if Will Varell gets a run at some point. He looked pretty well. He still didn't look, AFL ready, probably, to be honest. But he, I don't think he looked the sort of physique he'll get there pretty quick.
When I spoke to Jason Taylor at the end of last season, he said Blake Howes was very close last year to getting a game. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see him in the mix, particularly if the former Casey's there.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about him, and he was my pick last year, and he looks a very neat player. Didn't Grundy mention? Did you ask him about the two rucks? Didn't you? He said something about Will Varell.
He said that his follow up work's very good.
Yeah,
he's quite strong. He did start off with a groin injury, so he's just sort of getting into full time training now. So look, we've got the luxury of time at the moment.
And JVR is a really interesting one. I find it fascinating. Like development, there must be a point at which it becomes deleterious to his career to not be playing AFL footy, and that probably is this season. I don't know. Like how long do you have a player of his quality running around in VFL where his development starts suffering?
But it's going to also relate if Ben Brown and T-Mac are tearing it up. Obviously, if they're not or they're injured, he's going to come in. No doubt about that. But these two are.
And on Ben Brown, people have said, and I've heard this from people at the club in interviews, but also on Demonland in regular track washes, have been saying how brilliant Ben Brown's been in training.
Yeah, look, Brodie Grundy said it.
That's right.
A lot of the trainings, he was sort of, obviously they're managing him through pre-season. He was doing a lot of work away from the group, but then every time they played a match sim, the proper match sims that they had out at Casey on a Friday, he was playing full games, kicking bags of goals on decent opposition in our star-studded defence. So you can only get picked on that, and we'll see how he goes in the real stuff.
Bags is the
he was kicking 4 to 6 goals in those games against quality defence. Radelaide asks, obviously Fritsch comes back into the side when fit, so who makes way for him in the forward line? And Chandler question mark. From all reports, looks like Fritsch might be recalled for the opening round. Looks like he might be ready to go. So big man, who makes way for him if from the team that we've seen in the last 2 weeks?
It's such a good question. Chandler seems the obvious one, but
sort of feel for him a bit because he's been training the house down, as they say. And he had he kicked straight in that practice match against the Tigers, he would have had 4. So how do you drop that guy? But
Fritsch, who else comes out?
He's been our leading goal kicker for 3 years in a row. How can you
well, Fritsch obviously comes back in.
If he's fit.
Yeah. So it's a really tricky one. It might not be... Chandler could stay in, but then it impacts who's the sub, for instance. And then,
he might be sub.
Like a domino effect that flows through, or,
He might be the sub.
He might be the sub,
Yep.
yeah. Although I'm not convinced he's really a
Sub material, yeah.
Sub
Well, we'll talk about sub material shortly. Dominion asks, how do you think we are going to use, well, this is the question. How do you think we're going to use the sub this year? Is it going to be a James Jordan type who can play multiple roles from midfield to up and down the flanks? Or will it be a more tall, mobile type like JVR or even Joel Smith? And I think personally, I think James Jordan is the type of player that will have the tactical sub. He can cover a number of roles. So it could be him or it could be a Wowie later in the year or even perhaps Blake Howes, as I mentioned. I see the merits of a Joel Smith as he too can go play a tall or medium forward or back. And George talked about JVR playing a quarter for Ben Brown, where Ben Brown plays 3 and he plays 1. But I can't see us using the sub in that way. I don't think we will. Big man.
Well, if you go by history as a guide, Jordan really is that, because even though it's a relatively new. Well, it's new in the sense
tactical.
It's not new because it used to be reserves.
So what's the rule? You can bring them on at any time, but the player you take off can't.
It's just a reserve, really.
No, but anyone you take someone out of the game. Is that how it's working?
Exactly. Yeah, they've got to come out of the game. So it'll be used more often, but it's really in how it'll be used is no different to the sub in the sense that the same questions are asked. What sort of player do you have on the bench?
Yeah, but we were never. I think some teams said, "Oh, this player's injured," and took him off. We didn't do that, so we can do that now.
Yeah, no. More, I mean, is we can do that now. But yeah, so there might be a bit of that. So I hadn't really thought through how teams might tactically take advantage of it. But just in terms of a mitigation, you lose a player. The cards we've shown on that front is that we lean towards a player like Bedford and JJ who can play multiple utility roles on the ground because they're the roles that are statistically most likely to be needed to fill, don't they? JJ can play midfield, half back, half forward. He can, wing. There's multiple positions. So I mean, it would be a gamble to play a JVR because you could play him he could probably go into the ruck, pinch hit a little bit. He did that at Casey. He can go forward. If he goes forward, McDonald can go back to cover a defender. But if I was a punting man, I would go with JJ being at the sub this weekend and that being the sort of player that they'll look to that position.
El Diablo 14 asks, what's our pass mark for the first 5 rounds of the season? And then Kiwi D asks a follow-up, what is the pass mark for the season? Top 4, top 2, then preliminary final. Now, we've got a very tough start, big man, to the season. Bulldogs, then we're travelling to Brisbane at the Gabba to atone for our semi-final loss, then back to the G to play Sydney, a team who have had difficulty beating in the past few years, as well as atoning for our qualifying final loss. Then we travel over to Perth and play the Eagles. Even if the Eagles are down, it's always a tough trip to Perth.
Come on.
I'm just trying to play it up a bit. Then we're staying on the road, albeit probably via Melbourne, to Adelaide for our clash with Essendon during the gather round. So we're travelling 3 times, playing 3 finalists in the first 5 rounds. It's not an easy run. Big man, you bang on about the importance of banking wins early. On your tough early season scale, what's a pass mark? Is it 4-1? Is it 5-0? Would you take 3-2?
I'd take 3-2, I think. I mean, anything worse than that, that's a problem. So 3-2 is just the pass mark. I'm hoping we're 4-1. I think, like I said last week, it won't be such a bad thing to have lost a game in those first 4 or 5 games because it takes that whole Melbourne are unbeatable picture right from the get-go, which was a bit of a millstone, wasn't it?
Well, gave me sleepless nights.
Yeah, exactly.
I liked it, but it
takes
gave
your
me
sleepless nights out of the equation. So hopefully it's not round 1 because then you'll have sleepless weeks.
You don't want us to lose round 1. Trust me, you don't want to be here next week.
So I'd say 3-2-4-1, somewhere around 3.5, maybe a draw. 3 and a draw.
Don't like the draws. As for the end of season pass mark, for me, it's top 4 at the very least. Normally, I'd say top 2 to try and ensure that home final, but that didn't really help us last season against 2 interstate teams. We do travel well, so top 4 in anything, but
I think prelim.
But that's what I said. Prelim and final week has got to be a massive fail, particularly whilst we're in this premiership window. These opportunities with the list that we have don't come around all that often. I'm 46 years old, and we've never been close to having such a talented all-round list that he's talked about in such a matter-of-fact way that we're not just premiership contenders but premiership favourites. I've got a list here from a survey of 13 Fox Footy experts, and 8 of them have us winning the flag. And it doesn't list here how many of them have us as grand finals, but I'm sure a few of the remaining 4 do have us as top 2. And that's just insane. In my life, I've never experienced an era where we are championed by the wider footy community like this. We need to make hay while the sun shines. Big man, you said pass marks, top 4.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that. I mean, look, everyone's seen how impressive we were, particularly against the Tigers. So, and how well we've trained. And pass mark, prelim, as you say, we're in the window now. We've got to be winning some flags in this next period of time. Otherwise, it will be a big opportunity loss, won't it?
And things can change so quickly, Look at Hawthorn. They're probably going to win a wooden spoon. A decade ago, or less than that, 8 years ago, you'd thought you'd never think of that.
It's quite a bizarre feeling, though, isn't it? Thinking of your team. It's not something I'm used to, thinking of my team as the team to beat.
Yeah, just crazy. Bigfoot asks, who is the one player that would be the biggest loss to the team if they were ruled out before a game? Last year, or the previous few years for that matter, I probably would have said, without a doubt, Max Gawn. But with the inclusion of Grundy into the mix, I'm more than confident that he can handle the ruck duty, preferably just for the week. I think we're invariably better with both of them, and I feel confident that Grundy can carry the load. Therefore, I'd probably say either Tom McDonald for some of the reasons that I talked about earlier in those stats, or, if one of the defenders like May or Lever went out, if we lost them before a game and they couldn't be replaced by another key defender in the emergency list, then, Tom McDonald is the one that covers down back, and then we lose Tom McDonald out of the forward line. So, again, we've just lost. He will rob Peter to pay Paul. So, T-Mac, losing T-Mac out of that forward line. So, whether it's a defender that comes out and T-Mac has to go back, I'd say losing T-Mac at the moment is probably a big loss, as we saw at the back half of last year.
I think we're better. As I said, we can cover him better this year. I still think Maxi.
I'm talking about that before a game, not losing him for a player for an extended period.
Well, even before a game, I just think he's so incredibly influential on the outcome. It's just think about the Richmond game. How he was everywhere, but not just what he did. He's just like that smother that I talked about. He adds so much more than just the stats and the numbers that he brings week in, week out. It's like that talisman thing that he brings. I just think for me, he's the biggest, most impactful, influential player, and then it's track. But Steve May, he'd take him out of the team on the eve of a game. You're structurally going to. It's impossible to replace his combination of strength and ability to get the ball up the ground.
Lazy asks, how many goals will we need out of our key forward group? T-Mac, Big Ben Brown, JVR, Shaki and friends to win the flag this year. Well, I don't have a number. And despite Goody's tenet of a strong defence underpinning the team's game style, I still believe we need to score a lot more in games. Last year, interestingly, we only scored 100 points on 5 occasions, whereas the Cats were able to achieve that feat 11 times. B-Man, do you have an exact number of goals that our forwards need to score?
237.
Nairobi Demon asks, which team do you think is our biggest threat?
I think the Dogs.
Yeah, I don't. And the one I've got 2, but one of them that I picked, you're not going to agree with, the Swans. You think they're gone? They're always a tough team for us.
I think they'll make the 8. Geelong will still be strong, of course.
Well,
they've got a great list. And
Swans always a tough team for us to beat, with the exception of 2021. And with the exception of 2021, the Cats, and 2021 included the Swans because we beat them that year too. Cats are always hard. We always have to play them in their lair in Geelong. This year, no exception. And we play the Swans twice this year as well. So Royal Demon, he actually asked a question that is coincidentally was answered in some notes that George wrote to us a few days before the question was even asked. So I'll read the question directly followed by George's prescient answer. Royal Demon asks, I would like to get the panel's opinion on what they think the biggest changes will be from 2022 to 2023. And George, using his crystal ball to answer this question before it was even asked, and obviously Royal Demon didn't know the question was going to be answered before he asked it. Number one, an uninjured list. Sometimes not much, this is George, sometimes not much can be done about this, as injuries to players were predominantly last year were predominantly collision based. It affected Gawn, Jackson, Ben Brown, T-Mac, Langdon, Salem, Lever, Rivers, Viney, and even Oliver and Petrarca. Compare that with the charmed run we had in 2021 that resulted in a premiership, and in almost identical circumstances resulted in a Geelong premiership in 2022 with a very ageing list. And then his number two is when a side is in their premiership window, as we are, trying to improve through the draft is fallacious. To that end, we have brought in Grundy and Hunter, who both fill important needs. The loss of Jackson meant another ruck to cover the hole, which was even more critical in the absence of any backups at Casey after the retirement of Dorr. To get an All-Australian level ruck who is physically strong and mobile was a steal, even more so when Collingwood are paying for part of his salary. And I like
Thanks,
that
boys.
part. Yeah. His recruitment is a nightmare for opposition, since there is no longer the option of keeping the ball away from Gawn at kickouts. For Gawn, it greatly reduces his physical exertions, so like in the Richmond practice match, he can impose himself more around the ground. Hunter is an even bigger fish landed. We struggled to find a winger to complement Langdon. Other sides had worked out not to go down the Langdon wing to cut off his extraordinary running skills. We tried Brayshaw, JJ Harms and Spargo to try to plug the gap. Hunter's recruitment solves the problem straight away, but more importantly, releases those same players to other roles. It also changes the game plan, as he can cover the defensive role when the opposition switch, something others struggled with. And to top it off, he has a laser-like kick.
Yeah, and I'd add to, partly because of Hunter, so the change that I see is that, they talked about it in the Richmond game, is more switches to the corridor. That's clearly, and more kicks, more direct kicks to the top of the 15, 20 metre zone, out the hotspot outside the goal. Hunter is critical to that, as we've talked about, is that suddenly, instead of it being a JJ or Gus, isn't going to get the green light to take that kick to the corridor on. But Hunter's going to he's brought in being told that he's going to do that kick. That's his go-to. So I was saying to someone this weekend, it's one of the best recruits for a specific role I can ever remember at the D's. I mean, again, we talked about it last week, but we didn't see the brilliance of Langdon's recruitment until we're well into the season, did we? But here you can conceptualise exactly what Hunter's going to bring. It's all those things George said, but the ability to have that player on the wing who can confidently hit that target both into the corridor, but even more importantly, the kick inside 50, the one that, drives people spare when we miss that with good reason. So we want the ball in his hands. We want him up on the half-forward flank as much as possible, kicking the ball inside 50. Nibbler is going to be important because he allows, that running power to cover some of the, it means that Hunter won't have to be as defensive as he otherwise would, but that's a good point George makes about his defensive running. He's amazingly fit, apparently. He doesn't look like a great athlete.
No, he doesn't, but he does.
He covers ground.
Yeah.
But so I think the big change will be, they've already flagged it, that Uze was quick to say, it won't be a massive change. So I think, we won't be all out crazy, but we're definitely going to be kicking, taking the corridor on more often, running in waves, being a bit more aggressive in our mindset. I think last year we allowed teams to play their style and we absorbed it. I think we'll be a bit more proactive and look to get on the front foot. And again, as I said, we were that way in the second half of last season. Maybe it was because we knew that we didn't have the tank to get to the end of the game, but it's really important to remember how aggressive we were in our mindset in the last 5 or 6 games of footy we played, where, we kicked big scores at half times in all of those games. We ran out of momentum a bit and puff, but it's not like it's a brand new thing. So, more aggressive ball movement using the corridor is probably the big change I see.
And that sort of leads into the next one. To what extent will the D's be less predictable in attack this season with 2 genuine wingers in Hunter and Langdon compared to 2022? And I think, as was flagged, we'll see the D's be more aggressive in their ball movement with more kicks into the corridor, as you said, and to the top of the goal square rather than going straight down the line along the boundaries. This more aggressive style of play, showcased in the preseason matches will hopefully make us a little less predictable. And I think with that addition of Hunter into the mix with his clean disposal, it'll have a huge impact on scoring. George mentioned how teams had worked out how to not kick to the Langdon win. Well, now teams have a catch-22, which wing not to kick to,
exactly.
The Langdon or the Hunter wing. And on the flip side, we now have the choice of which wing to go down. We've got the choice, which wing are we going to go down? And both have a bit of place, both get plenty of the ball and never seem to have an opponent. They can be both be damaging to opposition. And I've said this in the past 2 weeks on the show. I think Hunter was the biggest steal, as you just said, of the trade period, and we'll see that play out.
Basically. I think that's a good point about, that gives us 2 options. What that means is we'll still play footy in straight lines. So the 3 channels, 2 wings in the middle. So, whilst we'll cross into the centre more, we'll still play in straight lines. It just means that we'll probably use all 3 lines more often.
Yep.
The other thing about, it's a bit the same with Maxi and Grundy. Grundy, as George notes, Grundy means that it just gives Gorney a bit more freedom to be offensive and to not be targeted because they've got to worry about Grundy. Well, the same, maybe not quite as dramatically, but the same is true of Hunter and Langdon. So it might end up being a real boon for Langdon because, they maybe won't be able to just target him without targeting Hunter. They'll have the same sort of dilemma that they'll have with Grundy and Gawn. So, it might end up, he might have a better season because of Hunter's in.
Well, let's get on to the Dogs preview. The Demons return to the MCG to atone for the sins committed on the MCG last September when we were unceremoniously bundled out of the finals in straight sets. We take on our recent nemesis in the Western Bulldogs. We have a tough few weeks to kick off the season, so a win on Saturday night is imperative. Bin Man, we've gone on quite long tonight. Can you give us a quick preview of this game? Do we risk Viney? Does Fritsch play? Does Judd McVie debut? You've got 30 seconds. Go. No, you can take as long as you want. People can fast forward or close the app. If you're a true Demon fan, then you're still here listening to us. So
you're as pumped up as Andy said he was at the top of the show.
Take your time.
Judd will play.
McVeigh.
Judd will play. Juddy will play. I don't think Viney will.
No. And that goes into the player management, not playing players injured. Don't start off on it.
And I'm not convinced Fritter will either, to be honest, just because I'm a bit concerned about the length of time that's taken to get right, because it was one of those 1 week, 2 week things, and now we're into the 3rd, 4th week. It bloody worries me, those foot injuries. We've had some shots.
It's not a foot. You're talking about Fritsch. Sorry,
yeah.
I thought you were talking about Viney. It's a knee.
Well, Viney too, but I know he's not a foot. But there is talk that Fritter might play, but I'm not convinced that he will. Yeah. Judd will play. So it'll be a fascinating game, and one of the real fascinating things will be to watch how different it is the way the Dogs play. We're for a team that I think will trouble a lot of opposition with those 4 tall setups. That's 4 quality players up there who are, as I said, mobile, athletic, need cover, get up and down the ground, good runners as well as good marks and good kicks. We're probably best placed of any team in the AFL to manage a team with 4 genuinely good talls.
So they got Norton, they got Lobb,
Darcy and
Ugle-Hagan. So who lines up on Ugle-Hagan, who's probably the smaller of the...
Yeah, well, that's a good question. That might be where someone like a Rivers comes in, because you've got May seems to always take Norton. Petty, the Lob's so tall, so maybe May will go to him.
So is Darcy. He's skinny, but he's tall as well.
Yeah, that's right. Darcy's skinny, so Lob's skinny. So it's a really, it'll be fascinating to see. So, I mean, maybe Lever takes Lob. That'll be really fascinating to see. I guess whoever's the strongest of them, I went to Norton, but it's probably Lob's actually the strongest, and he probably will play a true full forward position. Lob come out of the square. I mean, Norton does too, I guess. So may Lob, may Norton, but I think we've got the right pieces in place to negate their strength. So it'll be a fascinating game to watch. I think tactically, I think we're in awesome form. We're at the moment we'll be looking to be aggressive. But so will they be. They'll be looking to move the ball forward. The one thing I will say about the question mark I'd have about the Dogs is it will take them some time to get that rhythm. Like if they've changed their game plan a little bit, and they are more direct and presumably less switching, less sort of multiple handballs around a contest out the back that break down. That takes time for everyone to know where they're going to be. We're already in that we're already at that stage where we know wherever it's going to be. So, we go into the game with a big advantage in that sense, I think. I'm super looking forward to it. But this is a danger game for us, I think. As I said, I think that they'll be a real surprise packet this year, the Dogs.
Anything else on that game?
No.
You're done? All right. Well, there you go. Well, I think we'll end that there. Thank you to everyone who wrote in questions, comments, predictions. I didn't get to read your predictions out because I knew this would be a long one. But thank you to RDB Hero, Bush Demon, Jabroni, Lefty, Pew Pew Pew, D Old Fartney, Sent, Radelaide, Borgzilla, Jonty, D Minion, El Diablo 14, Kiwi D, Bigfoot, What Say What, Lazy, Nairobi Demon, Sir Why You Little, Supreme Demon, Royal Demon, and Oh My D's. Your contributions to the show through your questions, comments, and predictions are much appreciated. Thank you. Thank you to our voicemailer, Noah. Thank you to my co-host, Bim Man in the studio, virtually, and George somewhere without phone reception. And a big thank you to our listeners. If you could please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or whichever app you use to listen to the show. It really does help us get more listeners. And I'll even read out your reviews on the air. We'll be back next week, hopefully celebrating a win to kick off the season. Otherwise, my MFC SS might start to creep back in as a reminder of some of those dark season openers of the past. Go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.
Come on, Demons. Come on, Demons. Come on,